Hello and welcome to another locomotive showcase video. Today we got a pair of diesels. Now this might seem a little strange because my previous videos tend to focus on my home layout rolling stock and locomotives, which tends to focus primarily on early transition era, late steam locomotives. For a fictionalized narrow gauge railroad, a 30-inch gauge narrow gauge railroad. Now, this might seem incredibly strange given that, because these are obviously, well, relatively early diesels. They are obviously deeply entrenched in the diesel era, given their paint schemes. And so this might seem a little strange, but my ventures into standard gauge, however, tend to focus primarily on 1960s era Santa Fe, more specifically 1960s era Santa Fe in California. So I'm only really concerned with locomotives and trains that would have been found throughout California, running through the Central Valley, the Tehachapi Loop, all of that. So in that spirit, these fit perfectly with my aspirations in standard gauge. Now, if I'm being completely honest with you, I did not actively seek out either of these locomotives. They were both happy little accidents, so to speak. I only had one set of Alcos prior, a PA and a PB, which I customized to fit and haul my 1964 San Francisco Chief. Now, I didn't really have any intentions of building much past that, but one of the things that ended up happening is when I bought the PA and the PB, I had decoders placed into them, and the decoders weren't matching up well enough. So I upgraded the decoder in the PA and then wound up buying the RSD5 in the back to put that now surplus Alco decoder in. Well, one thing led to another. Ended up buying the Soundtracks had a promotion a few years ago. Ended up trading that Tsunami 1 in for a Tsunami 2, which went into the RSD5. And so I ended up with a road switcher that I never really intended to buy in the first place, just to accommodate a surplus decoder. Then, and of course, because I could not leave well enough alone, I had to make it prototypically accurate, or as close to prototypically accurate as I could stand to do. So I ended up adding the extra exhaust stack on it, the extended exhaust stack, the antenna stand, as well as photo etched radiator fan detail in the back. And then, of course, because this was an older Atlas model, I chopped off all of the molded in grab irons and put in some new grab irons, and it became a thing that I never really intended it to be, but in the end it turned out pretty well, and it has that Kato drive in it, so it runs really, really well. Now the RS2 in the front, that's a whole different story. So the RS2 came about again by a happy accident. I ended up it was surplus from a friend of mine, and he was looking to offload it somehow, and was thinking about repainting it into something that it wasn't, like a fictional railroad or something like that. And I asked him, I said, hey, did Santa Fe ever have an RS2? Well, it turns out they only ever had one. And then, of course, that prompted the next question: did it run in California? Well, in fact, it did. This particular RS2 was the yard switcher at the San Bernardino yards for Santa Fe in the 1960s. So it checked all of the boxes. So I ended up trading for it. So I wound up with an RS2 that I had no use for, or had no immediate intention of purchasing. Problem was that there was, when it came to me, it was missing the short hood. And this became a saga. We never did find the original short hood, so I wound up manufacturing it out of some spare parts from an old RS3 kit. I ended up having to cut the panels down and re-glue them so that you had the long doors on it. Wound up customizing a lot of different things, again with the extended exhaust stack, photo etched radiator fans, and a whole slew of added grab irons. This build also included a whole lot of fabricated parts that came out of, I either had to have them 3D printed, or they had to be manufactured by hand. So the air intake for the steam generator was fabricated by hand. And the box cover for the relay equipment, I guess that's what it is. It's hard to tell in a lot of those pictures, but that had to be fabricated as well from scratch. I used a lot of reference photos to try to get it to as accurate as possible. It pretty much is as satisfying as I could get it. I'm not sure there's much else I could possibly do to it to make it as accurate as the prototype without potentially compromising its running integrity. But all in all, it turned out to be possibly my best work as far as detailing out and making it prototypically accurate as I've done in the past. So I'm really pleased with how they came out. Both of these locomotives are equipped with Tsunami 2 Alco diesel decoders, fitted with a sugar cube and a simple headlight package. I wasn't all that interested in going the whole nine with interior lights because, quite frankly, these models are not super detailed models, and that pretty much becomes apparent as soon as you look inside the cabs. Obviously, the RSD5 is an Atlas, so this was long time before they started putting interiors in their cabs, and the RS2 is a Proto 1000. So a lot of different work actually had to go in just to bring them up to this standard on the outside. So I really wasn't all that interested in lighting the number boards and all of that. So unfortunately, with the whole debacle with the short hood being a thing, and the whole slew of extra details that I had to add to this project, it actually wound up requiring a total repaint and relettering of the entire locomotive. So all in all, I'm really quite pleased with how this turned out, all things considered. I think it almost, there's a couple few places, of course, where I could improve in the areas, but I think it turned out pretty well. I only used acrylic paints. I used Badger paints for the yellow and the blue, and then of course micro scale decals for everything else. But I think it came out pretty solid, and it looks pretty good standing side by side with a factory painted locomotive. Okay, so we got them both on my test track and programming track here at my house. Again, I don't have a standard gauge line to run on at the moment, so this is the best that I can do to demonstrate the sounds. Both of these, as I said before, have a Tsunami 2 decoder in it, and both have a Sugar Cube speaker. For the RSD5, the Sugar Cube speaker is housed in the cab, and for the RS2, the Sugar Cube speaker is just underneath the radiator fans. Both of these models also feature a current keeper as well to help guide the locomotives over dirty pieces of track. So one of the things that I always like to do when I build new locomotives, especially locomotives that look really close to each other as far as style is concerned, is I always try to make them different in some way. Now, obviously the RS2 and the RSD5 are two entirely different locomotives, but on first glance, they do have a lot of similar features. So one of the ways that I differentiated between the two that seems to work, and I don't really have a lot of evidence to support this, but it seems to me that with the RS2 and the RSD5, there might have been some horn differences in the 1960s. I know Santa Fe experimented with an A200 and an A125, and there's a weird distinct difference between the two sound sets of the horns, so I assigned that particular horn combo for the RS2 and the straight A200 for the RSD5. And of course, in addition, the RS2 does feature a steam generator. I'm not entirely sure how often Santa Fe would have used this on this particular locomotive. I know that it was originally the demonstrator unit for Alco before it was purchased by a short line and then eventually purchased by Santa Fe. So I have no idea how often Santa Fe used it, but I know that they never removed it. So that's another way that the sounds might differentiate. So I'm going to go ahead and fire them up, starting with the RSD5. So that's the A200. And now I fired up the RS2. And that's the A200 A125. So there's a distinct difference between the two horns. Alright, once again, thank you for watching. Hopefully I'll get these two out on the rails pretty soon, and you'll have a good opportunity to see some run-by videos at some point in the not too distant. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.